Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Stories for Hope podcast. I'm your host, Nicole, and in today's episode, we are going to talk about legacy and specifically hear from Tom about the Eggum family legacy. Legacy can come in many forms, and a common description of legacy is a physical or monetary gift passed down after someone's death. But today we are talking about a legacy of faith, ethics, and core values. For those of you who are new, Stories for Hope is a podcast run by Hope for Kids International, a nonprofit whose mission is to restore hope to children and families around the world. On this podcast, we share amazing inspirational stories to inspire you to bring hope to those in need. Hope for Kids International was started by our founder, Tom Eggum, and this year marks his 50th year in ministry, which is just incredible and can be thought of as its own legacy. But if you ask Tom, he will tell you that the legacy of Hope for Kids started with his parents. So let's hear from Tom about the Eggum family legacy.
My parents came to came to Christ when I was 2. They were not involved in any church, had no faith at all, and somebody invited them to come and hear an evangelist speak at a Baptist church in the area and kind of dared them, and they decided to go. And they didn't like the speaker, but they liked the singer. So it was when they used to do like a week of meetings or whatever. So my dad said, let's go back. And anyway, the second night they went, they decided to be followers of Christ and were radically transformed. They had a reputation in our town for abandoning my three older sisters and spending the night in the beer joint and all of that, and they made a radical change in their life. And one of the things that really, one of my earliest memories is I knew we were probably the poorest family in our community outside of the migrant workers that came up annually to work in the potato fields. And yet I saw a generosity. My dad was a mechanic at the potato farm, and he made about $400 a month. And I can see this clearly. He wrote the first check to Temple Baptist Church for 10% of what he'd made. And that bothered me because I thought we could have used that. We don't have nice clothes. We had plenty of food. We had gardens and different things. My mother canned, we did all of that. But I saw that, and even though it angered me at the time, it really left a lasting impression. Then I saw them want to get involved in with the migrant workers. At that time, there were not laws protecting the migrant workers, and they lived in an abandoned farm and abandoned farmhouse. Some of them didn't have windows and just chicken sheds and different things, and that's where they lived. And they were very poor. And so my parents wanted to share out of our abundance, with them, and would bring clothes, um, food, whatever we had extra, or they'd get it from somebody and give it to them. But my dad really wanted them to hear the gospel. And we had a language barrier. Some of the kids spoke English, so it'd be translated and stuff. So my dad, first of all, he gave them little, I can remember them, little green Gideon New Testaments in Spanish. But the problem was, most of these migrant workers couldn't read. The kids could, but the parents couldn't. So then he came up with this idea that if they could just listen to a record of Spanish, and somehow, this is back in, the late 50s and early 60s, um, they didn't have electricity out there. And he somehow found out that you could buy a wind up record player. It was spring loaded and it was these 45s. And I remember it was blue and yellow. I can still see that. And I loved to wind that thing up. And then you put a 45 on there and it would play it without electricity or anything. You could hear it. And they bought, I think it was back to the Bible that they got it from, but they bought the Gospel of John on 45s in Spanish. And so I can remember the first time we were out there with that, And they were so amazed. First of all, that sound came out of this, and it was in their language, and it was the Gospel of John. So that really left a mark that my parents, who struggled to feed seven of us and to make a living and, you know, um, cared about people who were so poor, and they shared the gospel with them. And it was always growing up in that little church, there were always Spanish speaking people in that church from then on. Just so they really left a legacy of caring. I had a rebellious background. I rebelled against most of that, and then came to Christ through a group from the Lutheran evangelistic movement, and they shared a real positive gospel with me, and I responded, and then I ended up going to Bible college in Los Angeles, and there I that's really where this ministry was launched. I started witnessing on the street. I read about smuggling Bibles and started all of that, and my family uh, supported me. You know, my parents would write a check for me. My brother-in-law, the Scogan family, there was an aunt that helped finance me through Bible college. There was, I mean, all these people I was related to were really the first core of people that believed in me and did everything they could to support me to go to school and to travel and to go into the Soviet Union and smuggle Bibles and all of that. So the history of Hope for Kids International and our ministry and my life would not be here today in 2022 and 23 if it wasn't for the faithfulness of my parents, them modeling what it is to care. And what's been fun over the years is seen my brothers and sisters get involved. My sister Rachel, uh, in recent decades started Hope for Women and Dress a Girl around the world. They've dressed several million girls around the world. My sister Joan and her husband, they have sponsored many projects, children and projects, have traveled all over the world with us. My brother Rick lived in South America, has been to Africa with me. His kids have. That's what's fun for me. When the kids, the nieces and the great nieces and great nephews, and now I could go down the list of people related to my family, um, that have made an impact both locally and internationally. My sister Ramona's traveled with us. She had a Bible bookstore for years. She and her husband supported me right at the beginning. They were on my original board of directors when we started this ministry. Um, and then taking great nephews with me and my great nieces and my children and uh, seeing this impact our family to where even now a nephew of mine has a ministry in Minneapolis. So it's the next generation. So I love to reflect back on my parents and look at the kind of modeling they did. And the other thing I want to close with is my dad prayed a lot, and it bothered me. When I was in junior high, I would hear him, his room was across from mine. Before I go downstairs to do my paper out, I'd hear him in there praying. And I would purposely, this is how mean I would kick the door and a lot of times just use curse words. And when we would have, after our meal time, we'd have family devotions, and we'd read a portion of the Bible, and then he'd pray. And I used to mock him because he prayed for all my relatives, my aunts, my uncles, all the way. And none of them were believers. And then years later, when I was speaking in churches, here'd be those people he'd prayed for, one by one. So their example, their legacy, not only influenced myself and my siblings, and now through the generations, nephews and nieces and so forth, but cousins and aunts and uncles came to Christ in those last years. And I know it's because of his faithful prayer. And almost every morning, I pray through a list of my family, just like he did. Uh, and I truly believe the reason we're here today is because of the prayers of my parents. And they were faithful in that. And they didn't, I often think they didn't have a lot to give, but boy, the legacy they left us was priceless because it's love God, be generous, and care for the poor. And that's what we're trying to do.
What an incredible story. Legacy is so important and valuable. It can carry on for generations. All of our programs at Hope for Kids International support a legacy outcome. When you sponsor a child, you change their entire destiny. Their opportunity for education allows them to be self sufficient, achieve their dreams, provide for their family, send their kids to school. Then their kids can grow up, achieve their dreams, become self sufficient, and so on and so on. A clean, safe water well provides health and prosperity for an entire village and their children and their children's children, and so on and so on. Building schools and medical clinics provide education and health care for children and families for generations. How we love our family and friends, how we choose to live our lives, it's all part of our legacy. What kind of legacy are you creating in your own life? What kind of legacy will you leave when you leave this earth? I challenge you to take some time to reflect on these questions. Over the next few days or weeks, as you reflect, if you feel like you want to include Hope for Kids in your legacy, I invite you to get connected with us. And you can do so by going to h4ki.org. Thanks again for joining us today as we continue to share inspiring stories. Have a blessed day, everyone.